What is the true value of a single meal? For most, it's a few dollars a moment of satisfaction. But for Isabella Rossi, a 24-year-old waitress, drowning in debt and despair, it was everything. It was the only food she'd have in 24 hours. So what happens when a person with nothing gives away their only possession? You might expect a moment of quiet karma, a small blessing in return. You would never expect this. You would never expect the sleek black limousine that appeared outside her crumbling apartment the very next morning, sent by a man who saw everything, a man whose name is synonymous with power itself, Julian Sterling. This isn't a fairy tale. This is the story of how one small act of kindness in a rain-soaked alley ignited a chain of events that would challenge a billionaire's empire and change a city forever. The rain fell on downtown Boston with a relentless, percussive rhythm, each drop a tiny hammer against the city's weary soul. For Isabella Rossi, the sound was a familiar soundtrack to her exhaustion. It was 10 p.m. on a Tuesday, and the dinner rush at La Vita Bella, a once fashionable Italian eatery now clinging to its past glory, had finally subsided, leaving behind a battlefield of crumpled napkins, wine-stained tablecloths, and the lingering ghosts of conversations. Isabella moved through the wreckage with an economy of motion born from 5 years of practice. Her feet, throbbing in their cheap, non-slip shoes, felt like bags of hot cement. Her back ached with a dull, constant fire, but her mind was a frantic abacus, clicking and clacking with numbers. Rent was $400 due in 3 days. Chloe's medication copay $380 late. Dr. Aris Thorne's consultation fee $600, an impossible dream. Tonight's tips $78 or $50. The final number was a cruel joke. She'd plastered on her brightest smile for 8 straight hours, refilled water glasses with cheerful precision, and upsold desserts she couldn't afford to even look at. $78.50. It wouldn't even cover the electricity bill. Tough night, Izzy Marco, the head chef, called from the kitchen, his booming voice echoing in the now empty dining room. He was a large man, with a heart to match his chef's whites, permanently stained with marinara and compassion. "The rain keeps people home, Marco," she replied, forcing a lightness into her tone she didn't feel. "More for us, right?" He grunted, not fooled for a second. He knew about her sister. Everyone on the small staff did. Chloe, her brilliant, vibrant, 17-year-old sister, was the sun Isabella orbited. And that sun was being eclipsed by a rare autoimmune disorder that was slowly, cruelly stealing her mobility. The doctors in their local clinic had run out of answers, uttering phrases like experimental treatment and specialists, words that glittered with hope and were priced in gold. Dr. Aris Thorne at Boston General was the name they'd given her, the best pediatric rheumatologist on the East Coast, a gatekeeper to a future Chloe deserved. Marco emerged from the kitchen holding a styrofoam container. The aroma that wafted from it was heavenly creamy risotto with wild mushrooms and truffle oil, a staff meal he'd made from the high-end ingredients a cancelled private party had left behind. "Here," he said, pressing it into her hands. "You've been running on fumes all day. Eat this. All of it." Tears pricked Isabella's eyes. This wasn't just food. It was a gesture that said, "I see you. I see how hard you're fighting." "Marco, I can't," she whispered, her voice thick. "Don't be stupid, Isabella," he chided gently. "Go. Get home to Chloe. I'll close up." Clutching the warm container like a lifeline, Isabella stepped out of the restaurant's back door and into the alley. The rain had softened to a miserable drizzle, slicking the cobblestones and making the overflowing dumpsters gleam under the single flickering security light. The air was thick with the smell of wet garbage and damp concrete. This was her shortcut home, a grim little path that shaved 10 minutes off her walk. She was halfway down the alley when she saw him. An old man, huddled in a recessed doorway, his thin frame wrapped in a tattered coat that looked more like a dirty sponge. Beside him, shivering, was a small, scruffy dog, its tail tucked tightly between its legs. The man Elias was a fixture in the neighborhood, a quiet, gentle soul who never panhandled aggressively, merely existed on the periphery, a ghost in the urban machine. Isabella's first instinct was to hurry past to guard the precious heat of her meal and the $78 in her pocket. Survival was a sharp, selfish instinct. Chloe needed her. She needed to be strong. She needed to eat. But then the man coughed a deep, rattling sound that seemed to shake his entire body. The little dog whined softly and licked his hand. In that moment, Isabella didn't see a homeless stranger. She saw a profound, lonely desperation that mirrored her own. She saw a living creature offering comfort to another with no expectation of reward. Her feet stopped. The war inside her was brief but violent. Chloe, the bills. You haven't eaten since breakfast. It's truffle risotto, for God's sake. Then a quieter voice, her mother's voice, from a time before sickness and struggle, whispered in her memory. Kindness. Isabella is the only currency that costs nothing to give and makes the giver richer. She walked over to the man. "Excuse me," she said softly. Elias looked up, his eyes weary but clear. He flinched slightly, expecting to be told to move along. Isabella held out the styrofoam container. I'm not very hungry." She lied the words, tasting like ash. "And this is too good to waste. Please take it." The man stared at the container, then at her face, his expression a mixture of shock and disbelief. "But you... please!" she insisted, her voice cracking slightly. She placed the container in his trembling hands. He opened it, and the rich aroma filled the damp air. The little dog perked up its nose, twitching. Elias broke off a small piece of a mushroom and offered it to the dog, who devoured it gratefully. Then he looked at Isabella, and his eyes for the first time filled with a light that pushed back the alley's shadows. "God bless you, miss," he rasped. "God bless you." Isabella just nodded, unable to speak. She turned and walked away, the gnawing emptiness in her stomach, now accompanied by a strange, soaring warmth in her chest. She didn't look back. She couldn't. She never saw the car parked at the far end of the alley, a black Audi A8, with windows so heavily tinted they looked like polished obsidian. She never saw the man sitting in the back seat, his face illuminated by the soft glow of a tablet. He wasn't looking at stock prices or quarterly reports. He was watching the grainy feed from a high-definition security camera he'd had installed on the building opposite La Vita Bella years ago, a building he owned. Julian Sterling, the reclusive, formidable head of Sterling Industries, lowered his tablet. He had watched the entire exchange. He had seen the waitress's exhaustion, her brief hesitation, and her ultimate, quiet sacrifice. He was a man who dealt in billions, who moved markets with a single phone call, who understood leverage risk and return on investment better than any man alive. He did not believe in altruism. He believed in motivation. He believed in character. For years he had been searching for something or someone authentic in a world of sycophants and calculated transactions, and in a filthy, rain-slicked alley he had just witnessed a transaction of pure, uncalculated humanity, a woman with nothing giving away her everything. He pressed a button on his intercom. "Arthur," he said, his voice a low baritone. "Get me a name. The waitress who just left the restaurant." A calm voice replied from the driver's seat. "Already on it, Mr. Sterling. Isabella Rossi lives at 432 Oak Street, apartment 3B. Julian Sterling leaned back against the plush leather. A slow, calculating smile touched his lips. It was the same smile he wore just before a hostile takeover. "Tomorrow morning, Arthur," he said. "Send the limousine." The morning sun fought a losing battle against the grimy window of apartment 3B, casting weak, dusty rays across the small, cluttered living room. The apartment was a testament to Isabella's life, a balancing act between love and poverty. Chloe's vibrant paintings were tacked to the peeling walls, a riot of color against the drab beige. Textbooks and medical pamphlets were stacked neatly on a wobbly coffee table. The air smelled of toast and the faint antiseptic tang of Chloe's medication. Isabella had woken up with a hunger so sharp it felt like a physical blow. She'd made Chloe a small breakfast of toast and jam, watching her eat every crumb with a mixture of love and envy. For herself, there was only black coffee, a bitter brew that did little to quell the frantic rumbling in her stomach. "You're quiet this morning," Izzy Chloe said, her voice bright, despite the fatigue that always shadowed her eyes. She was sitting at their small kitchen table, sketching in a notebook, her fingers still nimble, flying across the page. "Just tired," Isabella lied, managing a weak smile. Long night. A sudden commotion from the street below drew their attention. Voices were raised, a car horn blared, and Mrs. Gable from 2B, the neighborhood's unofficial town crier, was yelling something unintelligible. "What's all that about Chloe?" wondered, craning her neck to see. Isabella peered through the window and her heart stopped. Parked directly in front of their crumbling brownstone, double-parked and causing a minor traffic jam, was a limousine. It wasn't just any limousine. It was a long, impossibly sleek black Bentley Mulsanne Grand Limousine, a vehicle that looked like it had taken a wrong turn from another dimension. It was so out of place on their block of cracked sidewalks and struggling storefronts that it was almost comical. "Must be for someone in the new condo building," Isabella murmured, though that was 2 blocks away. Just then, a man emerged from the driver's side. He was tall and impeccably dressed in a classic black chauffeur's uniform, complete with cap and gloves. He moved with a quiet dignity, ignoring the stares and shouts of the neighbors as he walked directly to the front steps of their building. A moment later, a sharp, polite knock echoed through their apartment door. Isabella and Chloe exchanged a bewildered look. No one ever knocked. The landlord always yelled through the door, and friends used the buzzer. Isabella's heart began to hammer against her ribs. Had she been served an eviction notice? Was it a debt collector finally tracking her down in person? Wiping her sweaty palms on her jeans, she opened the door a crack. The chauffeur stood there, his expression serene and unreadable. "Isabella Rossi?" he asked. His voice was calm, a low, cultured timbre. "Yes," she squeaked. "My name is Arthur. Mr. Sterling has sent me to collect you." Isabella stared at him blankly. The name meant nothing to her. "Mr. who I think you have the wrong person." "I don't know any Mr. Sterling." "Julian Sterling, Arthur," clarified as if that explained everything. "He requests your presence at his offices downtown. He assured me you would understand." Isabella's mind reeled. Julian Sterling. The name suddenly clicked. It was a name you saw in financial news, on buildings, on charity gala invitations she'd only ever served at. Sterling Industries, the reclusive billionaire. It was absurd, a prank. It had to be a cruel, elaborate prank. "No, I'm sorry, this is a mistake," she said, trying to close the door. Arthur put a gloved hand gently on the door, stopping it. "There is no mistake, Ms. Rossi. He was very specific. He asked me to mention the alley behind La Vita Bella last night." The blood drained from Isabella's face. The alley, the old man, the risotto. Someone had seen her. Why was she in trouble? Had she done something wrong? 1,000 terrifying possibilities flooded her mind. "What is this about?" she demanded, her voice trembling. "Mr. Sterling prefers to explain things himself," Arthur said calmly. "He is waiting. And he is not a patient man." From behind, her Chloe's voice, full of curiosity, piped up. "Izzy, what's going on? Who is that?" Isabella was trapped. The entire neighborhood was now watching. Mrs. Gable was practically hanging out of her window. To refuse would create an even bigger scene. To go felt like stepping off a cliff. But the mention of the alley, it was a hook, and it was firmly lodged in her. "Give me 5 minutes," she said to Arthur, her mind a storm of confusion and fear. She shut the door and leaned against it, breathing heavily. "A limo for you from Julian Sterling." Chloe's eyes were wide with a mixture of excitement and concern. The tech billionaire. "What did you do? I have no idea," Isabella whispered, frantically, trying to change out of her worn t-shirt and into the one presentable blouse she owned. "Chloe, I have to go. I don't know what this is. Lock the door behind me. Don't open it for anyone. I'll call you as soon as I can." The 5-minute walk from her apartment door to the limousine felt like a mile. Neighbors stared openly, whispering behind their hands. It was the walk of shame and the red carpet all at once. Arthur held the door open for her, and she slid into the back seat, sinking into cream-colored leather that was softer than anything she had ever touched. The interior of the car was silent, insulated from the world she had just left. The city rolled by the tinted windows in a muted, distant film. It smelled of leather and wealth. A small refrigerated compartment held bottles of sparkling water. This single vehicle was worth more than every apartment in her building combined. Isabella sat rigidly, her hands clasped in her lap, her cheap blouse feeling like sandpaper against her skin. She was an imposter in this world of silent, effortless luxury. The chauffeur, Arthur, said nothing, his eyes focused on the road, adding to her sense of unreality. The car glided through the city, eventually pulling up to a skyscraper that seemed to pierce the clouds. It was a monolith of gleaming black glass and steel, with the words "Sterling Tower" etched discreetly in platinum letters above the grand entrance. This wasn't just a building, it was a statement of power. Arthur opened her door before a doorman could even approach. "Mr. Sterling's office is on the top floor. They are expecting you." Walking into the lobby was like entering a cathedral dedicated to commerce. The floors were polished marble, the ceiling soared 50 feet high, and a silent, efficient army of men and women in tailored suits moved with purpose. Everyone was beautiful, confident, and exuded an aura of importance. Isabella, in her 5-year-old shoes and bargain rack blouse, felt like a stray dog that had wandered into a palace. A woman at the front desk with a headset and a surgically attached smile looked up. "May I help you? I'm here to see Mr. Sterling. My name is Isabella Rossi." The receptionist's smile didn't falter, but her eyes did a quick, dismissive scan of Isabella's attire. She tapped at her keyboard. "I'm sorry I don't see an appointment for—" Her eyes widened slightly. "Oh, yes. Ms. Rossi. Of course. Please take the private elevator to your right. It will take you directly to the penthouse level." The private elevator was as luxurious as the car, with wood-paneled walls and soft, recessed lighting. It moved upwards with unnerving speed and silence. There was only one button, PH. As the door slid open, she wasn't in a hallway, but directly in a vast, minimalist office that seemed to hang in the sky. Floor-to-ceiling windows wrapped around 3 sides of the room, offering a godlike panorama of Boston. The furniture was sparse and elegant, a single massive desk made of a dark, polished wood, 2 chairs in front of it, and nothing else. And standing by the window, his back to her, was a man in a perfectly tailored charcoal suit. He turned slowly. He was younger than she'd expected, perhaps in his late 30s, with sharp, intelligent features, intense grey eyes that seemed to miss nothing, and an air of coiled, predatory stillness. This was not a man who smiled often. Miss Rosie Julian Sterling, said his voice, the same low baritone she'd heard in her dreams, or perhaps nightmares. "Thank you for coming. Please sit." He didn't move towards her. He gestured to one of the chairs facing his desk, making it clear this was not a conversation between equals. This was an audience. Isabella's heart hammered against her ribs as she crossed the vast, empty space and sat on the edge of the chair, feeling the terrifying, exhilarating certainty that her life was about to be irrevocably changed. The silence in the office was a living thing. It pressed in on Isabella, magnifying the sound of her own frantic heartbeat. Julian Sterling walked from the window to his desk with a deliberate, unhurried pace, his movements radiating a confidence so absolute it was intimidating. He didn't sit, but instead leaned against the front of the desk, towering over her, his grey eyes performing a cool, dispassionate analysis. "Do you know why you're here, Miss Rossi?" he asked. His voice was devoid of warmth, a precision instrument designed for clarity, not comfort. "No," Isabella answered her own voice, barely a whisper. "Your driver mentioned an alley." A flicker of something, not quite a smile, but an acknowledgement crossed his lips. "Indeed. The alley. I own the building across from La Vita Bella. I own a number of buildings. I find it prudent to keep an eye on my investments. Your city has interesting nightlife." Isabella felt a flush of anger mixed with her fear. He'd been watching, spying. "What I do on my own time is my business," she said, a spark of her usual fire breaking through her anxiety. "Ordinarily, I would agree," he said, unfazed. "But what you did was not ordinary. My security chief provided a full report. You worked an 8-hour shift. You earned $78.50. Your bank account is currently overdrawn by $17. The meal you were given by your chef was according to my analysts, who cross-referenced market prices for the ingredients worth approximately $45. It was likely the only substantive food you would have eaten in a 24-hour period. And you gave it away. To a man with no ability to repay you. Why? The clinical breakdown of her poverty and her actions was humiliating. He had dissected her life like a specimen under a microscope. "He was hungry," she said, her chin lifting defiantly. "His dog was hungry. It's not more complicated than that." "Everything is more complicated than that," Sterling countered, his voice sharp. "People act out of self-interest. They perform charity for social credit, for tax deductions, for the dopamine rush of perceived virtue. You were in a dark alley. No one was watching. There was no audience to applaud your benevolence. You gained nothing and lost a great deal. It was an illogical transaction." "Maybe not everything is a transaction, Mr. Sterling," she shot back. He straightened up and walked around his desk, finally taking his seat. The massive chair seemed more like a throne. "That is the single most naive statement I have heard all year. Everything is a transaction. The question is simply what currency is being exchanged. You, Ms. Rossi, deal in a currency I rarely encounter genuine empathy, and that makes you either a fool or an extraordinarily rare asset." He steepled his fingers, his gaze pinning her to the chair. "I am not a philanthropist in the traditional sense. I don't throw money at problems. I invest in solutions. I invest in people who can execute those solutions. The Sterling Foundation has poured hundreds of millions of dollars into structured top-down charity initiatives. Homeless shelters with a 40% recidivism rate. Food banks with massive logistical overhead. We write checks, we host galas, we get our pictures in the paper, and the needle barely moves. He leaned forward, his intensity palpable. I am starting a new pilot initiative, codenamed Project Undercurrent. The goal is to bypass the bureaucracy, to find a way to deliver aid at a grassroots level with intelligence efficiency and compassion. To treat the cause, not just the symptom. To do that, I need someone who understands the landscape. Not from a boardroom on the 80th floor, but from the cracked pavement. I need someone whose first instinct is to understand the problem before trying to solve it. Someone who sees a hungry man and offers him her own meal, not a business card for a shelter that's already full. Isabella's mind was spinning. What are you saying? I am saying, Miss Rossi, that I am offering you a job. The words hung in the air, seeming to warp the very fabric of reality. A job here. It was ludicrous. I'm a waitress, she said, bewildered. I have half a community college degree in social work that I couldn't afford to finish. What could I possibly do for you? You can give me a perspective. My entire Ivy League-educated board of directors lacks, he said bluntly. I don't want you to run the project, not yet. I want you to be its heart, its eyes and ears. Your initial role will be Special Projects Coordinator for the Foundation. Your first task is to spend 30 days on the ground and draft a proposal. A real one, no corporate buzzwords. I want a plan that details how you would effectively and permanently change the life of one person. The man in the alley, for example. I want a budget, a timeline, and a measurable definition of success. I want you to show me how you would solve an illogical problem. He named a salary that made Isabella feel dizzy. It was more than she made in 3 years. It was enough to pay her rent, the bills, Chloe's medication, and Dr. Thorne's consultation fee 10 times over. It was a lifeline. It was a miracle. It was also terrifying. Just as she was trying to process the offer, the door to the office opened, and another man walked in. He was older than Sterling, in his late 50s, with silver hair, a handsome but severe face, and a suit that was even more expensive. He carried a leather-bound folio and radiated an aura of crisp, condescending authority. Julian, we need to finalize the quarterly report before the call with Tokyo. The man said, his eyes flicking over Isabella with barely concealed disdain. In a moment, Marcus. Sterling said, his tone unchanged. Marcus Thorne, this is Isabella Rossi. She will be joining the Foundation as a Special Projects Coordinator. Isabella, this is Marcus Thorne, the Executive Director of the Sterling Foundation. Marcus Thorne's polite smile was a thin, brittle veneer over his shock. A new coordinator. I wasn't aware we were hiring. It was a recent decision. Sterling said, a clear dismissal in his tone. Isabella will be heading up Project Undercurrent. She will report directly to me. Please see to it that she has an office, a security pass, and a preliminary budget of $50,000 transferred to a new account under her discretion. Thorne's jaw tightened, almost imperceptibly. $50,000. To her reporting directly to Sterling, it was a flagrant breach of every protocol and hierarchy he had so carefully constructed. Of course, Julian. Marcus said, the words clipped. He turned to Isabella. Welcome aboard, Ms. Rossi. I'll have my assistant Cynthia get you started with the necessary paperwork. I'm sure you'll find the work demanding. The subtext was clear. You are out of your depth, and you will not last a week. Isabella felt a chill. She had just been handed a golden ticket, but it came with a gatekeeper who clearly saw her as a threat, an insult, an unwelcome weed in his pristine corporate garden. Sterling stood up, signaling the end of the meeting. "Ms. Rossi, my offer stands for 24 hours. Arthur will take you home. Let him know your decision by tomorrow morning. Don't be a fool." It was a command, not a piece of advice. As Isabella stood on shaky legs, she knew she had no choice. Chloe's face flashed in her mind, her smile, her courage, the growing fear in her eyes. This wasn't just a job. It was a chance at a cure. It was hope, packaged in a terrifying high-stakes corporate game she had no idea how to play. "I accept," she said, her voice stronger than she expected. Julian Sterling nodded once. "Good. Don't disappoint me." As Marcus Thorne escorted her out of the celestial office and into the sterile, fluorescent-lit world of the Foundation's floor, she could feel his resentment like a physical force. She had just been dropped into a shark tank, and she didn't even know how to swim. The first week at the Sterling Foundation was a brutal lesson in culture shock. Isabella's new office was a glass-walled cubicle that offered the illusion of privacy while ensuring constant surveillance. It was located in a corner far from the executive suites, but squarely in the path of the Foundation's busiest thoroughfare. Every employee who walked by gave her the same look, a quick, curious glance, followed by a swift dismissal. She was the waitress, the special project, Julian Sterling's strange pet. The whispers followed her like a shadow. Marcus Thorne had made it clear through a series of passive-aggressive actions that she was on her own. His assistant Cynthia, a woman with a perpetually strained smile, had provided her with a laptop, a security pass, and a mountain of corporate guidelines on branding synergy and stakeholder engagement. When Isabella had asked for data on the city's current outreach programs, Cynthia had vaguely directed her to a labyrinthine internal server with no clear instructions. Isabella spent the first 3 days drowning. She was used to tangible problems, an empty salt shaker, a customer's complaint, a spill on the floor. Here the problems were abstract, wrapped in jargon and buried in spreadsheets. She sat through a 2-hour meeting about optimizing philanthropic impact metrics that left her with a throbbing headache and a profound sense of inadequacy. The other coordinators, sharp young men and women with degrees from Harvard and Yale, spoke a language she didn't understand, referencing white papers and sociological studies, while she was still trying to figure out how to use the corporate email system. Marcus would often walk by her cubicle, a smug little smile playing on his lips as he saw her staring, bewildered at her computer screen. He was waiting for her to fail. He was counting on it. On Thursday evening, defeated and overwhelmed, Isabella sat in her silent cubicle long after everyone else had gone home. The $50,000 budget sat in an account she was too terrified to touch. Her grand task to change one person's life felt not just impossible but absurd. How could she draft a proposal when she didn't even know where to begin? She thought about Chloe, who had been so excited, imagining a world of easy solutions. The reality was a crushing weight. Frustrated, Isabella pushed aside the corporate handbooks and pulled out a simple notepad. She closed her eyes and went back to the only part of this entire situation that felt real, the alley. She remembered the damp chill, the smell of rain and garbage, the look in Elias's eyes. She remembered the dog. What did he need? Not a mission statement. Not a synergized outreach initiative. He needed warmth. He needed a doctor. He needed food. Yes. But he also needed to be seen as a person. The next morning, Isabella bypassed her corporate wardrobe and put on a pair of clean jeans, a simple sweater, and comfortable shoes. Instead of taking the limousine Arthur now faithfully provided, she took the subway. She didn't go to Sterling Tower. She went back to the alley behind La Vita Bella. Elias was there in the same recessed doorway. He looked surprised and a little wary to see her. "Hello again," Isabella said, keeping a respectful distance. She held up 2 paper cups. "I brought coffee and a donut. Figured you might be cold." He accepted the coffee gratefully, his gnarled fingers wrapping around its warmth. His dog, who he called Scrappy, wagged his tail cautiously. Isabella didn't ask him a list of probing questions. She didn't treat him like a case study. She sat on a clean, overturned bucket a few feet away and simply talked to him. She asked about Scrappy. She told him about her job at the restaurant. She didn't mention the Sterling Foundation or the fortune that was supposedly at her disposal. For the first hour, his answers were short, monosyllabic. But Isabella was patient. She knew how to wait. She had waited on thousands of tables, learning to read the subtle cues of strangers. Slowly, Elias began to open up. He wasn't a lifelong vagrant. He had been a carpenter, a union man with a wife and a small home. An injury on the job, followed by an opioid prescription, had started a devastating spiral. His wife had passed away. He'd lost the house, and pride had kept him from his estranged children. Scrappy was his only family now. His chronic cough wasn't just a cold. He hadn't seen a doctor in years. He was terrified of shelters because most wouldn't allow dogs. Isabella listened. For the first time in years, someone was truly listening to Elias, not as a statistic, but as a man. She bought him lunch from a nearby deli. She bought a bag of quality dog food for Scrappy. She didn't give him cash. Instead, she asked him a simple question. "Elias, if you had a magic wand, what's the one thing you'd wish for right now? Not $1 million. Something real." He was quiet for a long time, looking at his worn-out boots. "A safe, warm room for the night," he finally said, his voice thick. "Where Scrappy could stay with me, just for one night." That was it. That was the starting point. The next day, Isabella walked into Sterling Tower with a new sense of purpose. She ignored the curious stares and the pile of unread corporate emails. She used the Foundation's powerful search tools, but instead of looking for philanthropic models, she looked for solutions. She researched pet-friendly short-term housing. She found a network of vets who did pro bono work for the pets of the homeless. She cross-referenced city maps with public transportation routes. She was starting to build her proposal. It wasn't about reinventing the wheel. It was about connecting the dots that the big, cumbersome charity machines always missed. But as her professional life found a flicker of hope, her personal life was thrown into chaos. She came home late one evening to find Chloe pale and shivering on the couch, a high fever raging through her small body. A local doctor diagnosed it as a severe flare-up of her condition, triggered by a common cold. "Her immune system is overreacting, attacking itself," the doctor explained grimly. "The standard treatments are becoming less effective. You really need to get her to a specialist, Isabella. She needs the kind of advanced care and monitoring we can't provide here." The words were a dagger in Isabella's heart. Dr. Aris Thorne. The $600 consultation fee was no longer the issue. It was getting an appointment. Men like Dr. Thorne were booked months, sometimes years in advance. She had money now, but it felt useless against the monolithic wall of the medical establishment. The pressure was immense. She was fighting a war on 2 fronts, a professional one against a system designed to reject her, and a personal one against a disease that threatened to steal her sister. The $50,000 budget for Project Undercurrent felt like a cruel irony. She had the power to help a stranger, but she was powerless to help the person she loved most in the world. She sat by Chloe's bedside that night, sponging her forehead with a cool cloth, her mind racing. Failure was not an option. Not at the Foundation, and certainly not here. She had to succeed. She had to prove to Julian Sterling that his insane gamble on her was worth it, because, now more than ever, she needed the power and resources that came with his name. The job was no longer about survival. It was about saving Chloe, and Isabella was prepared to do whatever it took to win. With a new desperate fire lit within her, Isabella threw herself into her work. Her proposal for Elias, which she internally called the Dignity Project, began to take shape. It was practical, human-scaled, and utterly unlike anything the Sterling Foundation had ever produced. Phase 1. Stabilization. Secure a room at an extended-stay motel that allowed pets. Cost $200 for 1 month. Arrange a full medical checkup for Elias at a community clinic and a veterinary visit for Scrappy. Cost approximately $500 using Foundation-affiliated services. Provide a gift card for groceries and warm clothing. Cost $400. Phase 2. Restoration. Once his immediate health and housing were stable, connect Elias with a vocational counselor specializing in retraining for workers with physical limitations. Explore options for him to use his carpentry skills in a less strenuous way, perhaps repair work or teaching a class. Simultaneously, engage a pro bono social worker to help him begin the difficult process of reconnecting with his family. Phase 3. Integration. The end goal wasn't permanent dependency, but sustainable independence. This could involve a subsidy for a small apartment deposit or tools for a new trade. The budget for these latter phases was flexible, dependent on Elias's progress and needs. It was a simple bottom-up approach that cost a fraction of the Foundation's typical multi-million-dollar initiatives. It was focused, measurable, and compassionate. Isabella felt a surge of pride as she put the finishing touches on the document. It was the best work she had ever done. She submitted the proposal directly to Julian Sterling via a secure internal messaging system he had shown her, bypassing Marcus Thorne completely. The response came less than an hour later. A single word, proceed. Buoyed by the approval, Isabella set her plan in motion. With a few phone calls and the powerful backing of the Sterling Foundation name, she secured a clean, safe motel room. When she went to the alley to tell Elias, his reaction was one of stunned, tearful silence. The sight of him holding the key to his own room, Scrappy excitedly sniffing at his heels, was a victory more satisfying than any paycheck. But Isabella's victory was not celebrated by everyone. Marcus Thorne saw her small success as a grave threat. This waitress, this nobody, had been given a direct line to Sterling and a slush fund, and she was actually producing results. It undermined his authority and made his own meticulously crafted, data-heavy reports look bloated and ineffective. He saw her as a cancer in his perfectly ordered world, and he decided it was time to cut her out. The sabotage was subtle at first. An important meeting she was supposed to attend was accidentally left off her calendar. A crucial file she needed from the archives was misplaced. Her IT requests were mysteriously delayed for days. It was a campaign of 1,000 paper cuts designed to make her look incompetent and disorganized. Isabella, used to the straightforward conflicts of the service industry, was initially baffled. She worked harder, stayed later, trying to compensate for the mysterious obstacles that kept appearing in her path. Then Marcus escalated his attack. He knew Julian Sterling prized two things above all else: integrity and loyalty. If he could tarnish Isabella's integrity, he could destroy Sterling's trust in her. He found his opportunity in her project budget. Isabella, unfamiliar with corporate accounting, was meticulous but naive. She kept a simple spreadsheet and saved all her receipts in a folder. For the motel room, she had paid the first month's deposit directly with the corporate card. Marcus, who had administrative oversight of all Foundation accounts, saw the transaction. He then made an anonymous call to the motel's manager, posing as a foundation auditor. He asked a series of confusing questions about billing codes and vendor registrations, knowing the manager would be flustered. He then doctored an internal memo, making it look like Isabella had deliberately bypassed the Foundation's approved vendor list, a serious breach of protocol, and had possibly received a cash kickback for doing so, a common form of low-level corporate fraud. It was a flimsy accusation, but wrapped in enough bureaucratic red tape it could look damning. He didn't go to Sterling directly. That wasn't his style. Instead, he leaked his concerns to a few senior managers, men and women loyal to him. The whispers began immediately. "Did you hear about the new girl, the special project? Apparently she's already skimming from her budget. I knew it. Sterling brings in some bleeding heart off the street, and this is the thanks he gets. Marcus is looking into it. A real shame. It reflects badly on the whole Foundation." Isabella felt the shift in the office atmosphere instantly. The dismissive glances turned into cold, hostile stares. People would stop talking when she entered the break room. Cynthia Marcus's assistant now looked at her with open contempt. The final blow came during a weekly team meeting. When Isabella tried to give a brief update on her project, Marcus cut her off. "Thank you, Isabella," he said, his tone slick with false concern. "However, I think we need to pause any further discussion on Project Undercurrent until we've cleared up some serious accounting irregularities that have come to my attention. We have very strict fiduciary responsibilities here at the Foundation, and we cannot tolerate any deviation, no matter how well-intentioned." The entire room went silent. All eyes were on Isabella. She was being accused, publicly humiliated, and she didn't even understand the specifics of the charge. Her face burned with shame and anger. "I don't know what you're talking about," she said, her voice shaking. "I have receipts for every dollar I've spent." "I'm sure you do," Marcus said smoothly. "But it's a matter of procedure, something you may not be familiar with. We'll discuss it offline." She was dismissed, branded a potential thief in front of her colleagues. She fled the meeting room, her heart pounding with a sense of profound injustice. She went to her cubicle, her mind reeling. This was it. This was how she would fail. Not because she was incompetent, but because she had been outmaneuvered in a game she didn't know she was playing. She felt utterly alone and defeated. She thought of quitting, of walking away from this toxic, backstabbing world and retreating to the familiar misery of her old life. But then she thought of Chloe, her fever finally breaking that morning, her weak smile as Isabella left for work. And she thought of Elias, sleeping in a real bed for the first time in years. Quitting wasn't an option. She was being attacked, framed. And for the first time in her life, Isabella Rossi decided she wasn't going to just serve the meal. She was going to fight for her place at the table. But how could a waitress possibly take on a man like Marcus Thorne, a master of the corporate game? She had no allies, no evidence, and no idea where to even start. Defeated but not broken, Isabella realized she couldn't fight Marcus Thorne on his terms. She couldn't win with corporate policy, but she could win with people. Her battlefield would not be the boardroom, but the hallways. She spent the next day talking to the people Marcus deemed invisible, the cleaning crews he disrespected, the junior assistants he intimidated. She listened to their stories, earning their trust. From them, and a cryptic hint from Arthur, the chauffeur, about Marcus's distrust of digital records, she learned of his Achilles' heel, a locked filing cabinet, where he kept physical copies of his most sensitive documents. His analog redundancy. Using her newfound alliance with the cleaning supervisor, Isabella gained access to his office during his lunch hour. With a paperclip and a waitress's ingenuity, she jimmied the cheap lock on his cabinet. Inside, she found her file, Clipped to the back of the official memo accusing her was a draft created days before the incident, with Marcus's own handwritten notes outlining the entire conspiracy to frame her. It was the smoking gun. She went straight to the penthouse evidence in hand, only to find Marcus already there, smugly delivering his final fabricated accusations to Sterling. "She is a common thief, Julian," he declared. But Sterling's cool gaze was on Isabella waiting. Her fear was gone, replaced by a cold fire. "No," she said, her voice steady. "But you should be more careful about what you write down, Mr. Thorne, especially in your analog files." The color drained from Marcus's face. As terror dawned in his eyes, a slow, calculating smile spread across Julian Sterling's. "Excellent," Sterling said, his voice dangerously calm. "I was wondering how you'd handle it. Did you truly think I was unaware of his plot?" "This was never about him, Isabella. It was about you. It was the final test." The revelation hung in the air, a stunning gambit revealed. Marcus Thorne, utterly broken, was quietly escorted from the building, his career in ruins, but his son's future secured by Sterling's act of ruthless compassion. Isabella stared at the billionaire, a storm of betrayal and vindication raging within her. "You planned it," she whispered. "You let him do all of that to me." "I did," Sterling admitted, his voice softening. "This world is full of men who will see your kindness as weakness. I already knew you had a heart, Isabella. I needed to know if you had a spine. You don't fight with corporate daggers. You fight with human connection. That's a power they can't defeat." He slid a folio across the desk, its title catching her eye, the La Vita Bella Foundation. "I'm not offering you a job as a coordinator. I am offering you the presidency. I want you to reshape this foundation from the ground up." Before she could process the life-altering offer, he brought an image up on his monitor, the kind face of Dr. Aris Thorne. "Dr. Thorne's research is funded by one of my grants. I have tripled his funding and spoken to him personally. Your sister Chloe has an appointment with him tomorrow morning." In that moment, everything crystallized. The job, the title, they were secondary. He was giving her Chloe's future. Months later, the La Vita Bella Foundation was a force for grassroots change in the city. Elias had a home and renewed purpose, and Chloe, under Dr. Thorne's care, was on the road to recovery. Standing on the observation deck beside Sterling, Isabella looked down at the same view that once terrified her. She no longer saw an intimidating landscape, but a community she now had the power to heal. She had given away a single meal, and in return had been given the ability to feed thousands, proving that the greatest returns always come from investments made by the heart. Isabella's story reminds us of a profound and often forgotten truth: the largest changes often have the smallest beginnings. It wasn't a billion-dollar check that changed her world. It was a single $45 risotto given with an open heart. Her story proves that kindness isn't a passive virtue. It is an active, powerful force for change. It's a currency that enriches both the giver and the receiver in ways we can't possibly predict. In a world that often feels cold and transactional, one simple act of genuine empathy can create ripples that become waves of transformation. What do you think? Have you ever witnessed a small act of kindness that had a huge impact? Share your stories in the comments below. Let's fill this space with proof that humanity's best side is still out there. And if this story moved, you please give this video a like, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe to our channel for more real-life stories that will restore your faith in the power of the human heart. Thank you for listening.